This week we're learning about editing by recreating a scene from a film and breaking it down to see what they did to make it so good. Hello, my name is Cade and this is DSLRguide. So I've taken this scene from a film and I've adapted the script a little bit and completely reshot it, but I made sure that the editing was exactly the same. So let's watch this 1-minute clip and see what we can learn from it. And by the way, if you can work out what the original film that I've adapted it from is, then do write in the comments.
What are you doing here, Jack? I think I've found the answer. There's going to be a rally down at the square on Tuesday, and we can prove to everyone that no one has to live like this. But I need your help. You're here to drag me into your dreams of change. You know what I'm offering. You have to decide for yourself. Money, not just money. You remember. It's the chance to make a difference, to be at the forefront of a new society, one that values community over business. You want me to get involved with the protests. You won't actually be there on the day. You'll just set up the campaign and bring in the publicity, that's all. Run the campaign yourself. No one listens to me. All this sounds a bit unnecessary. Unnecessary? The people in this town, your friends, they're living in corruption. And this rally, this last rally, this is where we end it. I would not be here if there was another option. I need your support on this.
Now you may have noticed that we only used one actor in our version of the scene and that at times the audio was definitely distorted, but that's okay because we're just focusing on editing. So most of the time in films they'll cut to the next shot either slightly before someone has finished speaking or slightly after, and this really helps it to flow because if you think of in a real life conversation, when you hear someone start talking over here, it takes a while before you look over to them to see who's speaking. It's definitely not instant. So the common terms for this are L cuts and J cuts, since on the timeline they kind of look like the letters L and J, the audio forming the bottom part of the letter. So here's an example of an L cut followed by a J cut, so you can see what I mean.
You know what I'm offering. You have to decide for yourself. Money, not just money. You remember.
Now notice how differently it plays out if we cut directly when someone finishes speaking.
You know what I'm offering. You have to decide for yourself. Money, not just money. You remember.
And by the way, I'll add a little annotation button right here which will take you back to the scene in case you need to watch it again to see what I'm talking about. Now, if you listen to a real conversation, you'll notice that people often interrupt each other, rarely leaving a pause before the next person speaks. And professional editors will often say that if you're in doubt, just always condense the scene and make it shorter. So if we look at our scene, we can see that each line of dialogue tends to come pretty quickly after the last one. And this makes it especially powerful when we do have a big pause as the character admits that no one listens to him. And notice how before this shot, there was no audio overlap, it was just a straight cut, which I think helps it to feel really sudden. Because for Jack, this was probably the toughest part of the conversation, and I think that having that really abrupt cut and the dramatic pause really helps to make it a lot more powerful.
Run the campaign yourself. No one listens to me.
So one of the most important things to consider when editing a scene is the pacing. Now, if we look at our scene in terms of the cuts, we can see that to begin with there are many cuts, and then later on the pacing generally slows down. So as he makes a better argument, talking less about the details and more about his bigger picture idea, we see that the cuts kind of stretch out a little bit, which I think reflects how the character has more time for him. Everything is a little bit more focused. The audience is not looking from one character to the other nearly as much. They're kind of more focused on one person. And this is a good example of how sometimes editing is really hard to describe with words, which is why I think it's so important that we do look at editing in this much detail. So for example, people often use fast cutting in an action scene to make it more exciting, but I think in this case it works really well to have the cuts slow down a little bit so that we can kind of take more time to understand the character. But editing isn't just about timing, so in real life conversations you're not always looking at the person who's speaking, and as the editor you have the power to influence where the audience is looking. So when one character says the line,
"The people in this town, your friends,"
he's making it personal, he's reminding him that it's going to affect him too. So as he says that, we have a shot of him breaking eye contact, which I think is a really powerful way to show the audience that the protests do matter to him. The fact that it's his friend, his town, that's at risk is difficult for him to hear, so he looks away. So we don't always need to see the person who is speaking, often the people around them and their reactions are a lot more important. So the next thing to consider is the type of shots. Traditionally, the director and cinematographer will choose what kind of shots, whether it's a wider shot or a tighter shot, but they often will shoot the whole scene with a master wide shot and then close-ups to give them more options in editing. So let's watch the scene again, but this time with just the close-ups.
You won't actually be there on the day. You'll just set up the campaign and bring in the publicity, that's all. All this sounds a bit unnecessary. Unnecessary? The people in this town, your friends, they're living in corruption. And this rally, this last rally, this is where we end it. I would not be here if there was another option. I need your support on this.
Notice how with just those shots we have a pretty good idea what the whole scene is about, and even though it's only 6 out of the full 20 shots, it really does kind of encompass the whole idea of the scene. And that's hardly surprising, since often in cinema they'll reserve the most important parts of the scene for close-ups. And this is because close-ups are naturally the time when we are most intimate with the characters. It's the time when we can see their face expressions most clearly. And also notice how for our second character, the 2 widest shots are reserved for when he's definitely opposed to the idea, but then as he gets convinced, the camera kind of gets closer and closer as he sympathises with our character and the audience sympathises with him. Now, this is not a formula for how you should do it every single scene, but it's nice to be able to see how one person has done it so that we can then decide what we want to do for our own scenes. So the lesson here is that editing is not about having fancy plugins or a really fast computer. It's all about using it as another vital storytelling device. So that's pretty much it. If you want to see more episodes of this series where we break down scenes from a film to see what we can learn about it, I did another one about sound design, link in the description, and also on the blog post I'll put some videos which have taught me loads about editing. Again, link in the description. So that's it for this week, and I'll see you next time.